Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, one of the better college football games that you're going to see all of 2024. Georgia coming out on top 44-42, 8 overtimes. Dill, one of my biggest takeaways from this football game, as you know, I'm kind of just going off the cuff here. Normally, I got some notes that I want to talk about. This is kind of going to be off the cuff a little bit. Two big takeaways. One, we talk all offseason long and cover this Georgia team on the recruiting trail and all the 5-stars that commit to Georgia. Who are your two best players on the football field? Who are the two players that won you this football game? Two former walk-ons in Dan Jackson and Cass Jones. In some of the biggest moments in this football game, those were the guys that were making plays. And Kirby Smart kind of said it best in the post-game interview. Georgia got out physical in this football game, figured out a way to win, but you got to give a ton of credit to Georgia Tech and Haynes King. Haynes King, an absolute warrior. And if I'm a Georgia fan, I'm looking at Buster Faulkner, that Georgia Tech offensive coordinator, and saying, hey, if we're looking for an OC in this offseason, Buster Faulkner's got to be at the top of the list because they ain't many better across the country that we've seen in 2024. And you could tell Haynes King was kind of limited. They had to build this offense around what Haynes King could and could not do. And I thought Buster Faulkner did a great job. I want to get into a few takeaways, some things that I think Georgia needs to clean up, and then have a conversation of what does this mean for the SEC and the college football playoff rankings as well. Now, before we get into it, as always, Georgia fans, Georgia Tech fans, college football fans that stayed up for this game, a lot of different takeaways. Would love to hear from y'all in the comments section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, biggest takeaways from this Georgia Bulldogs win, what you got for me?
I mean, I really obviously, I think Georgia just punched their ticket to the college
Yes.
football playoff. I think if they didn't win that game, the SEC championship game was certainly going to be a play-in game. Obviously, they're in, but I think if you're a Georgia fan, you're looking now. You've played two really dynamic rushing attacks that when they're at their best, they can be really dangerous. And that's Alabama and Georgia Tech, two teams certainly leading with those quarterbacks. I think you look like they need to figure out a better way to create some negative plays and let their linebackers and defensive ends be more impactful on these games because those are their two top positions. You look at that Texas game, how did they kind of dominate it?
Yep.
Linebacker play, defensive end play, really, really strong. You're just not seeing those guys make enough of an impact on these types
On a
of
consistent basis. You know what I mean? Like, there are some games in which you watch the game, aka that Texas game, and say, all right, that's the Georgia front seven that we all know and love from the last couple of years. Same thing in the second half against Clemson. You've seen games where they can physically just take over football games along the line of scrimmage, but then you see games like this, and Kirby Smart, said it right at the halftime interview and said, hey, we're not winning on first and second down. Like, we're just allowing Georgia Tech to stay on schedule and stay on the football field. It starts with creating negative plays. That's what's made this Georgia defense so hard to deal with in the past years. And just there are some games where it's like you're looking for these difference makers to take over the football game, and they really
and the
don't.
frustrating part is you're seeing a bit of a pattern, in my opinion. Like, again, when the quarterback can run and they can put some pressure and force your linebackers and defensive ends to play with more discipline, they're kind of taking those guys out of the games a little bit. I think, again, you look, there's got to be some answer to that because you do need to be able to create those negative plays that Georgia's
To me, I think it started with Buster Faulkner and what this Georgia Tech offense is. It's kind of a unique and tricky matchup for Georgia. Like, you got all these dominant front seven defenders, and they want to be so aggressive. It's hard to be aggressive when Georgia Tech's throwing all these different personnel groupings, different looks, and different pre-snap motions at you. There's a lot of eye candy. There's a lot of window dressing that goes into this Georgia Tech offense. They executed it very well, but I think also you saw, a lot of these edge rushers kind of get taken out of the game. A lot of these backside linebackers kind of freezing and not chasing plays down. That's kind of what it came down to for me. Now, you switch to the offensive side of the football. One of my biggest concerns in it kind of continues to be a concern, is sometimes the lack of ability to just lean on the run game. Now, is it fair to criticize them in this football game because you were down 17-0 going into half, so you kind of had to lean on the passing attack in the second half? Yeah, sure, but we've seen this Georgia offense, especially when Carson Beck is struggling normally, this Georgia offense can turn around and say, hey, we're just going to impose our will up front and run the football. You haven't seen that be an answer for this Georgia offense. And you kind of get the feeling that at some point in the playoffs, you're going to need that. Will Georgia have that in the college football playoffs? That's probably the question a lot of Georgia fans are asking themselves.
Yeah, but on the bright side, you kind of see when Carson Beck and that offense wake up, like they can be really dangerous.
Yes.
Their ability to score really quickly, especially attacking that middle of the field. And again, the emergence of Oscar Delp, I think, is becoming huge. Like he kind of felt like he wasn't high impact guy, frankly, for the first 7-8 weeks,
No.
however it was. But he's really started to come on and play really strong football. I think you're seeing Carson Beck settle in. But also, those wide receivers need to make some more plays
Yes,
for him.
that's
You
where it's
look
at.
at like Arian Smith dropping some balls, love it, not making some plays for him. Like those guys at the end of the day, like I know Beck takes a lot of heat, but they still have their moments where they're guys
I
on
didn't
the
think Carson Beck was all that bad. You cannot, and you talk about like Carson Beck, having no rhythm in the offense. Like it's because these guys are just letting balls hit their hands and dropping them. Like it's hard to find a rhythm if you're a quarterback when your pass catchers are consistently not making plays for you. That needs to be addressed. Like it's either like, hey, Arian Smith, Dominic Lovett, like guys that Georgia has relied on at times in 2024. You either step up and start making plays or you go to some other wide receivers that can catch the football. And that has to get situated as you go into the college football playoffs because it's been a problem all year. Like the pass catchers on the outside without guys like Ladd and Brock, they're just not making enough plays for Carson Beck. And yeah, Carson Beck hasn't been great at times in 2024. To me, it starts with some of these pass catchers helping him out. You notice something that's important, though. If there is, like, you're trying to take some upside here, getting these tight ends increasingly involved is huge. Like that is something that Georgia has leaned on the last couple of years. You saw it kind of come to fruition against Tennessee a couple of weeks ago. You're starting to see it again. So there are things that make you feel good about where Georgia's at. But I mean, from an overall, like they got some obvious things that they got to clean up on both sides of the football. And I'm sure Kirby Smart knows that. I don't think that's groundbreaking analysis from either of us. Now, Dill, to me, another interesting conversation. Look, Georgia is into the college football playoffs, right? Even if they lose in the SEC championship, I'd be very surprised if they get knocked out. What does it mean for teams like Alabama or Ole Miss, some of these other SEC teams that have 3 losses that are fighting for college football playoff spots? To me, look, I've never been a guy that has been blind to the SEC being a very good conference in the past, right? I've been very vocal that, hey, it's hard to win football games every single week in the SEC. I look at this year and say it's just, and it's not a knock. And I think a lot of Georgia fans and SEC fans would probably agree with this. I think this was a kind of game where you kind of showed maybe the SEC shouldn't be getting the benefit of the doubt like they've had in the past. Now, my opinion of this might change back in 2025. Like there are certainly seasons where there's been like, hey, it's pretty damn clear that the SEC has been the best conference in all of college football and they deserve to get a little bit of grace. I don't know if this is the year. Like you look at some of these teams, even the inconsistency from Georgia, the inconsistency from teams like Alabama, some of these top teams in the SEC, I don't think are as quite, as dominant as we've seen in the past.
Especially because there's going to come down to a debate with SMU and Clemson, who are kind of hanging right
Yeah.
around where Ole Miss, Alabama, those 2 and maybe even a South Carolina 3-loss teams are
Yeah.
hanging. Like, yeah, that's going to become a debate. And again, like this showing is probably not super helpful for that cause, if you will, where you look like, are you going to leave out an SMU team or a Miami team or a Clemson team who, again, their resumes are going to be what they are. They're not going to have played the same schedule that these SEC teams are. When you get this type of result, it's harder to say like, oh, just wait till the SEC. If they have to play these teams from the SEC, they'll get boat raced. I mean, Georgia Tech was right in this game, and I honestly think Georgia
Georgia
played
Tech
well.
was the better
Georgia
football
Tech was
team.
just
I
good.
don't think, and I don't think Georgia fans would disagree with that. Like tonight, Georgia Tech was the better football team. I'm not saying Georgia Tech wins it more times out of 10 than Georgia, but tonight, Georgia Tech outplayed Georgia. Georgia figured out a way to win that football game. Dill, to me, that South Carolina Clemson game seems so big. You know what I mean? Like if you're South Carolina, that SEC program going against one of the top teams in the ACC, and we already saw that week 1. It's going to be another one of those games that when you're trying to stack these conferences, that's a game and a result that you got to watch very carefully. So we're going to get an answer to that noon later today, right? It's midnight, past midnight for the boys out here on the East Coast. Still, those are some of my takeaways. Again, wild game. You could talk about a lot of different things. I think more it's just like the appreciation of some great football on Friday night. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.